It's May 27th, 2021, and we're talking to Evil Genius's head coach Peter Dunn about MSI, Evil Genius's midseason roster changes, and North American talent development. This is the True Sight Podcast. Welcome to the True Sight Podcast by Oracle's Elixir, your source for in-depth analytical coverage of professional League of Legends and the rest of the esports world. I'm Tim Magic Sevenhusen, and today we have Peter Dunn, the head coach of Evil Geniuses, returning to the show. Last time you were on is episode 15, and now we're in episode 33, so it's been a little while. How are you doing?
Hello, good morning, Tim. Doing pretty well. Looking forward to discussing a lot of interesting topics.
Yeah,
it's been an interesting off-season, though.
It definitely has. I think the mid-season can go a lot of different directions. It can be very busy. It can be very quiet. I think we've had a pretty interesting one. I'm not sure if all of the dust has settled yet. There might still be a couple things that we haven't heard about around the various leagues. I know there's still a lot of news coming out in the LPL, but there's been some stuff in the LCS for sure. But before we jump into all of that, I think it would be good to just take a few minutes to get your thoughts on MSI, which, just wrapped up last week. And I think the world moves on from it pretty quickly. But, I do think it was a really interesting tournament, and it would be cool to get a chance to hear a little bit from you on that. So we'll spend the bulk of the show talking about EG type stuff and allowing you to talk about your players and the plans that you guys are working towards and all of that. But on the topic of MSI, I think one thing I'd love to hear from you is how high you think the level of play was at this tournament. How I guess as a coach, how entertained were you by what you were seeing in that sense? So I guess it's not quite the same thing, but
sure. So it's a bit complicated. I think that basically this MSI is probably one of the fastest pace metas we've seen going into an international tournament before. And naturally, the faster the game is being played, the more variance there is, because the more you have to flip. And when we say flip, we don't mean 50-50 flip, right? But there's if you want to push the pace of the game, you have to play 70-30 flips versus 95% flips. And this is something we saw especially amongst the top teams, where people were playing on the edge, and sometimes you play on the edge and you go past the edge, right? And this is something Mad Lions and even Damwon are teams that are not afraid to try to flip the game on early game plays. It's interesting because this is the first MSI for a long time where China has been the slowest paced team.
yeah.
RNG were the slowest paced team at this tournament, and I don't think I can ever recall that happening before in the past.
It was definitely one of the really interesting stories of this tournament that RNG came in, and people who don't watch LPL, which generally includes me because I just don't have time to cover it all, but you have this stereotype of the Chinese team as the one that fights all the time and just wants to play with all this aggression, and RNG came in as the side lane team and the macro team and the setup team, and it's like, oh, so now what do we think? How do we approach that?
Yeah, I mean, it was also kind of a miracle that they managed to qualify. They got destroyed in the upper bracket by FunPlus Phoenix. Everyone thought that FunPlus Phoenix were going to go. I thought FunPlus Phoenix were going to go. They had two really close series. I can't remember if they were both 3-2, but I remember them both being really close. Found their way to the final and just clutched it on the day, which was a shock to a lot of people. I think it's also worth saying that a lot of these emerging region teams now have become a lot more solid in their mid to late game. And the way that the jungle meta shaped up in Spring Split, and I think Riot have adjusted this a little bit, maybe we can talk about that later, is that it punishes any individual mistakes very, very highly, right? So you have a default way of playing the game, which is you just farm, you just perma-farm, but every single time you choose to gank, you have to give up something, right? You have to give up a camp, you have to give up leveling a camp, and that makes any kind of aggression or proactivity higher risk than it would usually be. So you didn't see that many 3.5 ganks into level 3 ganks or like cheese ganks early, simply because you're giving up a lot to be able to do this, and the higher placed teams are able to give up camps at the right time in order to be able to punish. But this means that every single time you make a mistake, you give the enemy team a huge amount. You can argue that Cloud9 lost their first game against Damwon Kia, the first game of the tournament, simply on the first scuttle. It's just that teams have gotten better. Teams are playing much faster, and so there's more mistakes, and teams know how to close better if you give them too much of a lead early.
Yeah, and I think the amount of the amount of, underperformance that needs to happen for something to be considered a mistake was also bigger, right? To extend that point,
Yeah.
like the level of mistake you need to make in order to not be able to secure the crab you wanted to secure is pretty minimal. Like you have to clear a little bit slow, or you have to misread the timing on your wave being pushed. Like the classic, the one everybody's gonna remember for a long time, Blabber, flashing in on that crab and dying, comes down to they misunderstood at what timing the top wave would be ready
Yeah.
for Fudge to have Prio and join and fight for that crab. And since they misunderstood that by only a few seconds, Blabber was suddenly put in a bad spot. He doubled down that mistake and it got worse. But like it was actually a really, really small mistake of understanding that turned into something so huge. So
Yeah.
I do think that was pretty fascinating. And I think that all of this definitely led into a tournament that to me felt like you could characterize it pretty easily as every team feeling inconsistent, although I think that's not really necessarily appropriate the way to describe it, but it felt like every team could one day look incredible and the next day look like, what are they doing? And I think that probably just comes down to what you're talking about, where the game itself had a lot of variance built into it.
Sure. But it's worth saying that, you look at a team like Damwon and in LCK, Damwon did have, messed up early games sometimes where they would just mess up something, but they could just team fight their way out of it.
Yeah.
Damwon could team fight you from 3K gold down in LCK
with a
and
bad
they're still
comp.
going to crush you with a bad comp and they're still going to crush you. But you try to do that against RNG or Mad Lions and you're just going to lose. And that's kind of what we saw happen a bit at this tournament. And Beryl, this isn't the. So Beryl was highlighted as somebody who is a bit of a weak point of Damwon, but this is his job on the team. His job is to force things and to make things happen. And teams were just better at punishing when he went in at the wrong time. I mean, you look at that team. Who else is the one who's primary engaged? It's not Khan. So and Showmaker and Canyon are there to clean up. So Beryl is the guy who has to take those risks, and sometimes you risk too much and you get punished.
How would you react to my characterization that I put out there a couple times? That Beryl was basically the Korean version of 2020 Hillisang. Yes? No?
Fair. Actually, very, very fair. But the thing is that you look at Damwon's record in Korea, and it's so easy to think, wow, look at how much they're dominating LCK. LCK's historically been this really, really strong region, and they didn't dominate as much as people think. They had so many games that they should have lost. And yeah, it's probably good for Damwon as well that they were punished like this, because it will mean that they'll go back and they'll rethink some things, and I'm sure we'll see a very strong Damwon coming into Worlds. Like I cannot imagine a world where Damwon are not top 8, probably top 4 at Worlds. So
and I think some of that conception of Damwon comes from the 2020 summer, right? Where that was true of them. They really did dominate the whole league that way, right? And then you come into spring, and if you didn't actually watch, you go, okay, it wasn't quite the same, right? The roster change in top lane and all of that. On the Cloud9 front, do you feel that they finished where they deserved to finish? Were they a very clear 5th place team? Like, how do you think they stacked up against the competition overall? Because I think it's easy to have a conception of either like they were really badly outclassed and they were 5th by far, or there might be some group of people that thinks they could have finished 2nd or 3rd if a few more things had worked out.
Cloud9, basically the reason Cloud9 did poorly at MSI is they didn't work out how they wanted to play the game. It's just really, really clear. You look at how Fudge and Blabber were playing together when they're playing for priority, when they're choosing to go for certain objectives on certain sides of the map. I don't want to give too much because I think we played Cloud9 reasonably early in the season. But basically, whereas you look at teams like Mad Lions who started inconsistently at the start of the tournament but worked out what they needed to do to win. Cloud9 never worked it out. Like you looked at Cloud9 and sometimes they're playing their, Lulu Cogmore, full hyper carry comp. Sometimes they're playing Kindred mid. Sometimes sometimes they're playing all of these picks which individually can be good in the right context, but they didn't develop a number one style. Or they didn't, in my opinion, they didn't, like, they had a clear way that they could win the game, which is whenever they camped for top, basically, they kind of won. And they got a lot of really good wins in the tournament by playing properly around Fudge and using that to snowball the game. And that's why a lot of the abiding memories of of this MSI, Fudge, smashing the game on his Lee Sin or his Renekton or something, um, because they played around top properly in a way that allowed him to function inside the game.
Mhm.
And a lot of their losses were simply situations where they were trying to do something else, and that never seemed to work. So I think they tried to do too much without refining that one style, and I think that makes it really hard to classify Cloud9 because I think when they were playing the style that made them strong, they could easily have made top four, maybe even top two. Depends
Yeah, I
how
think
other teams adapt it.
I
But
I I really would have been fascinated to see Cloud9 in a best of five because I feel like they would have had a chance to at least play a close series against most of these teams. I don't know, like I probably wouldn't have come in and predicted them to win any of them, but I think it was possible for sure, and I think it would have been really entertaining.
yeah.
Because
But to be clear, when they were bad, they were really bad.
yes,
Like when they were bad, they were not a top six team at this tournament. They were like eight, maybe seven or eight.
yeah. So I think it'll be interesting to see how they react to all that, what kind of reads they take away. I did an episode of Run It last week where I called out a certain part of their play style that I thought was, showing a certain misunderstanding of what was successful. I'm curious whether they agree with that and will make any adjustments on it, or whether they're going to double down on what they think works and how that's going to play out. And of course, the meta is going to change and all of that. But I think summer's going to be very interesting to watch for them for sure. On the Mad Lions front, as someone who was in the Mad Lions Oregon splice before that, how was it for you? Were you able to just kind of like watch and cheer for them and enjoy it, or what was the experience like watching Mad Lions play at this tournament?
I mean, it was a great tournament. I'm super. So I'm not happy with how it ended for them, but it was really great to be able to watch those guys as a fan. Like people like Humanoid, especially Mac. Mac I've worked with for
Yeah.
almost 4 years before I came to NA. But to see people like Mac, Humanoid, Kazi, Kaiser, all of these guys finally get to have a little bit of their redemption arc after Worlds would have been better if they'd managed to beat Damwon. But it was a really good tournament for them. Knowing those players personally, it was very clear when they were running it down. But let's say let's not call it running it down. Let's say providing more entertainment for the fans.
Yes.
Pulling out things like the Kog'Maw mid when the items are really bad for him, and doing playing on the limits in games that didn't necessarily matter. The Cloud9 game where they lost, the Istanbul Wildcats game that they lost, the Pain Gaming game that they should have lost. You can see when they're playing their limits. You can see from their webcam and not like their player cams and things like this, like when they're playing. And it sounds a lot like excuses and things like this, but I know those guys and I know when they're serious and when they're not. So So it was a fun tournament. Really, really happy to cheer for them as fans. Really happy for them to get a little bit of their redemption arc and an international tournament. So yeah, looking forward to seeing them at Worlds. Looking forward to seeing their ongoing improvement.
Do you find you have that kind of personal attachment to multiple of the teams that you've worked with in the past, or is it a little bit special with Mad Lions?
Oh no, for sure. Like I don't think I've left any team that I've been on bad terms. I cheer for all of my teams. I cheer for all of my past teams, even over regional. So I cheer for Mad Lions over Cloud9, even though I'm in NA. And whenever one of my other teams, whenever one of my previous teams is involved, I always cheer for them. Sometimes it can be a bit painful. INTZ at Worlds, when we were in the same group as INTZ, that was a bit rough, especially because we only won against INTZ, including in the tiebreaker. So not only did we let Europe down, we also kind of stopped Brazil getting their shot, which really hurt double. But no, I'm super happy for them, and I was happy for them at when they won at LEC2. I don't have any of that. I have no regrets, and I'm really glad that Mac has been able to find success because he took a lot of decisions last offseason that were very, very high risk. I think the fan base was reasonably okay with the decision to drop a Rome, but the decision to bring in Illuria over Shadow is something which had a lot of people were very, very surprised to see that, and I think his faith in Illuria has been really vindicated this split. And you have to give acknowledgement and respect for Mac
Yeah.
to not be satisfied with where Mad were and to push them forwards. And I'm really happy for him.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of Shadow, there was news out this week that he's joined an LPL team now.
Is that
Was it?
formal?
Yeah, I think it
Has
was
it formally
announced.
been released?
Or was it
Okay,
just
it's actually
rumored?
I I
Yeah,
don't
I
know whether
thought
it's
it.
been rumored or whether it's been announced.
Okay, I don't know either, but there's usually not a big gap. Assuming it's true, which it may or may
Yeah,
not be, but I think it is.
it
Uh,
sounds realistic. It
yeah.
sounds like what I've heard.
And how would you how do you feel about that? Are you kind of like sad to lose him to China, or did you think that this was a reasonable outcome for him? Or
I mean, it's if the rumor is true. So I'm just checking his Wikipedia and they haven't updated anything there.
yeah, okay, so it must not be
But
official yet, but
so the rumor is LGD.
right,
If it's true, I'm very very happy for him. I mean, to be honest, we kind of knew that Shadow wasn't going to be in Europe for his entire career. I mean, his dream was to play LPL. He even took Chinese residency, and we didn't care. And on Mad Lions, Europe doesn't import a ton of players.
yeah,
Although I will say, Mad Lions imported. Technically, we imported. Sorry, they imported Shadow last year and Armor this year, so they have more
yeah,
imports than almost anyone else in LEC. But LEC is not an import league, so it doesn't matter whether he takes Chinese residency. But
yeah,
it was always clear that this is what he wanted to do with his career. And I'm really happy he has the opportunity, and I'm sure he's going to do well. It's at least in meta, no? So,
yeah, yeah. There
so
you go.
Shadow is going to be, if they give him at least it's going to be really really great for him. And a lot of those high mechanical ceiling champions, he's really really good on. Um, so yeah, so I can't wait to see. I hope LGD do well. I heard they got the rumor is also that they got Shie back, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Uh,
Yeah,
Okay, so yeah, he was really strong at Worlds as well. So it will be interesting to see. I don't think they go into LPL is so stacked that I don't think they're one of the favorites for top four,
yeah,
but they should definitely be making playoffs. And then who knows when you're in playoffs, and anything can happen.
yeah, for sure. So, looking back and all that, it's been kind of fun to recap, but it is time to close the chapter on MSI to look ahead to summer. Not only in the LPL but in North America as well. And Evil Geniuses have made a handful of different changes going into summer. So if we make kind of the list of them, and you'll have to let me know if I miss one, but you promoted Danny, who was playing as Shiro from Evil
Mhm.
Geniuses Prodigies, the amateur team, into the LCS. You signed Team Luke to join your Academy team. And Shoryu was moved on to Evil Geniuses Prodigies from the Academy team. You brought in Skytech as the new support for Prodigies. And is there anything else that I'm missing? I think that's the
That's it.
various moves, right?
Yeah, those are the various moves. I guess let's start with Shuryu first.
Yeah.
So Shuryu had some visa issues. It's not performance related. We just want everyone uh, in LA. It's really important that we have our academy set up all there. So uh, uh, I'm sure he's going to do great. In amateur, they have a little bit of growing pains right now because they've made two major changes to the roster, but
Mm-hmm.
it changes the shot calling structure that the team has. So I think they'll find their footing. But hopefully, before they play TSM Amateur on Monday, it's always nice to beat TSM. So I hope they turn it around by then. But it's basically there's a group stage of the current amateur tournament. Which I'm not going to say the exact name because I don't want to embarrassingly say the wrong part of it. But they're in the group stage. They need to win in order to make next stage. And I'm sure you can do a really good job in amateur and help some of those young guys develop.
It's Challengers Uprising. I'm not sure which part of that frightens you, but
Okay, so I knew it was. So it's season 3 of Challenges Uprising,
yes,
and I had that in the back of my head, but
it's
I
like
didn't want
Summer
to
Showdown or
accidentally.
something.
Yeah, I didn't want to accidentally say something wrong, and then Peter Dunn doesn't know the name of all of these amateur tournaments. I don't want to
I
insult
got your
anybody.
back.
But yeah, okay. It's Challenges Uprising. They have group stage. It's 4 teams in each group, and basically they've won one game and lost one game so far.
Yeah.
It's played best of 3, which is really
Mhm.
interesting. Actually, maybe we can talk about that. The new amateur format. later.
Yeah. Well, because last split there were all kinds of best of threes. There were certain group stages I think that were BO1 in some of the tournaments. So basically there were 6 amateur tournaments before Proving Grounds. And some of these teams that made deep runs in all of them ended up
Yeah.
playing by the end of the spring split. They'd played like 90 or 100 games, like actual, like meaningful games. So like No Org had gotten there, and I think Barrage got up there. Like, wow, that's just so intense. And so one of the changes they made for summer is they pared that down a little bit. So there are three tier 2 tournaments, and then one Proving Grounds qualifier, and then Proving Grounds itself. I think I've got that right.
And I mean, obviously, it's extremely tiring. I mean, there was one series where EG Prodigies had to play. They played a best of five, which went to 5 games against Solo Fide. Lots of our players were East Coast or
Yeah.
like Central, and we finished that series at 12 at night or something, like 11. And then they had to play group stage the very next day,
Yeah.
I think. And it's hard to develop too much. In those kind of circumstances. Although Proving Grounds was a bit better, the tournament was a bit
Yeah.
spread out. But I think
Yeah.
this is really good for NA talent development because there's a lot of catching up to do. So let's talk about Danny actually, since we're talking about
Sure. We'll
since we just
jump
talked
to
about
whichever player you want to talk about next.
so basically the thing about Danny is I think that Danny is, if I had to compare him to a European player, he's the NA Kazi now.
Okay.
In terms of his playstyle, they have a lot of similarities. They like to go aggressive. They have pretty good dominant laning phase when they're in lanes that can play really, really aggressively. Still need to learn a little bit about weak side. Well, last year's Kazi. This year's Kazi is a lot better at it. But
Does Karzi play
they
Samira?
wow. Maybe not, maybe he doesn't. But I suspect that Danny won't play Samira either in LCS, or he'll get to play it once and then he won't get to play it anymore,
Yeah.
which is pretty sad. But I welcome teams to leave out the Samira against us. But it's worth saying that when Kazi came into LEC, he had been playing pro for 3 years. And he came in as a 17-year-old. So he'd been playing since he was 14, going and living in gaming houses. I don't know if you're technically allowed to be a pro at 14, so like a semi-pro, getting prize money. So he'd been playing in the Spanish league, he'd been playing in Germany, he lived away from home for large periods of time and had interacted with a lot of people in serious competition and had done well at serious competition. In NA, you didn't have that opportunity. And it's worth saying that Danny is somebody who's been playing League for 11 years now. Well, he's in his 11th year. He's been playing League of Legends since he was 6 years old.
I'm pretty sure I was in the Twitch chat where you first learned that.
Yeah, I mean, and this is a player who's been playing. He's been playing since he was 6 years old. He's been near the top of solo queue. He has 10 different accounts. He literally has 10 accounts in Diamond 1 Plus. I think he's let 5 of those decay so that he can play duo. But he has like 5 accounts in Grandmaster or higher. I'm not going to say what those accounts are. And if this was in Europe, this guy would have been playing in EOLs for 4 years by now. But in North America, he hasn't had that opportunity. And I think one of the big things that made even me underrate him as a player coming in is that we didn't have the tape of him because there was just no. I mean, I had his solo queue votes, but people can always look great in solo queue. If you just play your champions all the time. And obviously he had some strong performance on Zenith, which then became EG Prodigies.
Yeah.
But the data there was limited as well. Whereas when I was looking at Kazi, I had so many years, so many like 100, at least 150 games of data.
Yeah.
With Danny, I didn't have that data. And in a sense, playing so many games in Proving Grounds and Amateur Circuit really helped me get a better assessment of his real level. Basically, the EG LCS staff and Kelsey Moser, whose position is not linked to LCS, it's head of player collegiate and player development. I'm sure she'll correct me in the chat if she's there. But we have a lot of staff from the LCS, watching amateur, watching academy all the time, and I was very impressed with what I saw when I was watching him play. One of the reasons that I was helping out amateur and academy so much doing proving grounds is I want to have a look at our players, right, that we have in the lower teams, and there's, to be clear, EG's policy with our academy and amateur team is to develop players for EG, right? It's a selfish system. We want to turn these guys into players who can play for EG in the future. What I saw with Danny was very, very impressive. He is still very, very raw. Nobody comes in with half a split, but 1.5 splits because you can count what happened in winter 2020. Nobody comes in with that much experience and is flawless in every part of his game. And he's going to have to learn a lot of things. But from what I've seen in Scrim so far, it's been very encouraging. At the LCS level, he doesn't look like a fish out of water. He looks like he will adapt pretty well. Let's see how the season goes. His style of play is very, very high risk. So it could, the first game could be a 0-6 game, or it could be a 12-1 game, right? Who knows? And that's part of the excitement.
I think it's interesting to think about the fact that, like, with that kind of aggressive play style and like a high individual skill expression kind of thing, scrims strike me as the kind of place where you would get a very good look at that kind of a player, and the jump from scrims into stage might be a transition that is a little more difficult. But I think that's probably one of the benefits of summer being a triple round robin and carrying your record from spring is you can really afford to, lose out the first round robin and still be just fine for playoffs plus 8 teams getting into the playoffs, all of that. So I think all of that stage experience is going to be really, really important for a player like him coming in, I imagine.
I mean, it's worth saying as well that if Riot were using last year's amateur system, amateur proving like it was amateur academy system, Danny's not in LCS, right? Like, I mean, we just don't have the tape, we don't have the experience of playing against higher competition. The fact that he was able to play against academy level bot lanes, some of which are pretty strong, and hold his own, that's a big factor in it as well. It's not so. I mean, in a sense, it shows that Riot's system, where they want to promote young North American talent, is kind of already working. Looking forward to him making the step up. All I say is, if there are any EG fans watching or listening, give him some time. It will take a little bit of time, but the potential is there. And the hands are definitely there. He has fantastic.
Let's not see the situation where he gets promoted and we say the system's working and NA does have talent after all, and then 6 weeks later we're saying NA has no talent anymore because he's lost some games. Let's not go there. We can do better.
It's worth saying that the really interesting thing about Danny though was we had him in the roster, and there were lots of players in the main team who'd seen him and wanted to play with him. And this is even in Europe, one of the difficult things I've always found is that with experienced players, you tell them, we have this really superstar rookie, or I've seen this guy in the ERLs, and they don't want to take the risk. And this was not. I mean, this is a guy that I don't want to call out individual names, but this is a guy that people on the main roster knew about, were really excited to play with, and I've just been really grateful for the buy-in that we've had from the other players on the main team. So I'm sure we'll find a way to make it work. What I would say though is it does make EG even more aggressive and, dare I say, coin flippy, because coin flippy is linked to aggression, which means if you thought EG games were wild in spring, they're going to. I'm going to have grey hair by the end of summer, but they will be fun to watch.
I'm here for it. It will be fun. Speaking of the rest of the team, how do you think Danny coming in and the style he plays is going to affect the way you play with the rest of the team? Like, are we still going to be seeing a lot of impact on Renekton and playing for the top as the strong side and those kinds of setups, or is it going to shift? Is it going to give you any different kind of diversity in how you play?
I mean, we're not going to see any impact on Renekton. Like, he's banned every single game against EG. I mean, if they want to give us Renekton, we'll pick the Renekton, but we're not going to get to play Renekton. It's a real tragedy. But sure, if we get Renekton or Jace or things like that, Impact's always historically been a fantastic Jace. I mean, I could see situations where we're playing strong side. But I think the big thing that having Danny in the team will do is it will unleash Ignar. Um, Ignar is somebody who's historically always done well with aggressive
Mhm.
AD carries. He was at his best playing with Hans Summer,
Yeah.
and in Europe. Not bad with upset, but at his best with Hans Summer, and they would
Yeah.
just go in all the time and flip everything.
What were
And
the
I
what were the
think
classic picks he brought out playing against like SKT and stuff like that? Was that Pantheon support or was that someone else?
no, it's Leona was the really
Oh,
famous one
the
where they
the
were
Halo Blades Leona. That's what it was.
Hell of Blaze Leona. Yes, it was.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So that's the kind of style that Ignar really likes to play, and I think we'll see the big. So obviously, it's a big deal having Danny move to the main team, but the big thing change you'll see, I think, is in the way that Ignar is able to play the game now, and this is one of the big things that we had in mind. Because I mean, we could always have chosen to promote Danny in 2022. But one of the reasons we're choosing to promote him now is because of not just because of himself as a player and his own development, but also for what he will allow the rest of our team to do. Um, yeah, because I felt that Ignar was maybe a bit restricted in his options in Spring Split, and that kind of hurt us as a team.
Yeah, I'm being corrected in the chat that that Leona stuff was before Halo Blades existed and it was Fervor of Battle.
Oh, further
So
battle.
so this is
Okay.
this is important. This show is all about being correct. So here we are.
Yeah.
Speaking to the idea of promoting Danny now rather than waiting for 2022. So my understanding of the contract situation, and I don't know how much you're aware of the ins and outs of this, but is that an amateur contract isn't allowed to be carried over year to year. So is that a scenario where you guys thought about the fact that, hey, there's a roster movement deadline, we'd have to promote him before then, or is it just, hey, we have a great relationship and he's going to sign with us anyways, even if technically he's a free agent? Like, do you think about that kind of stuff, or do you leave that to other people in the org to worry about?
I mean, honestly, it's not my job to think about that. It's Andrew who's our GM and Greg who is
Hmm.
and Andrew's boss. But we for me, I think that the environment we provide in EG uh, is something that will encourage players to stay on here in the long term.
Hmm.
Um, we give a lot of attention to people in amateur and people in academy. Um, and this isn't just the case of, here's the VOD library of the main team. You can just watch
Study
this
them,
VOD
yeah.
library. Yeah, go and study it and see what you can learn. No, it's close one-to-one attention, close feedback. Making you can get one-to-ones with people whenever you want. Pretty much, you're only limited in how much you can learn by the amount of effort you're willing to put in. And effort also means going and asking people on Discord to give you a one-to-one on a certain topic. And sure, if somebody wants to come and offer one of our players an LCS spot at the end of their contracts, and we don't have room on the LCS team for that player, good luck in your career. But I feel that if what EG have to offer, if people are kind of at the same level, so it's going amateur to amateur or academy to academy, I think that we have a lot to offer compared to some of the other LCS teams. Like we really, really care about the roster, and we really want to develop our players so that they can be a part of EG, and hopefully we think that those players can be a part of, can also buy into this vision and want to be a part of EG long term. So yeah, so I think that Danny's always been somebody who's been on our mind as somebody we want long term, but the fact that his contract was running out at the end of this year wasn't a factor in this decision. It's
That's
purely yeah.
there's kind of a whole, I guess, topic area there of in esports and in League of Legends, the idea of how long is your contract, and kind of being in control of a player within your org and worrying about their contract's going to end. Are we going to lose them for nothing? Should we sell them? You get this a lot in
Yeah.
traditional sports, especially I think North American traditional sports, where you have trade deadlines and things like that. And hey, they're coming up on being an unrestricted free agent. We better trade them at the trade deadline, otherwise we'll at least we'll get a couple draft picks. And I think it's a really interesting area for League, because you have some orgs that tend to approach the kind of the problem from that angle, and it does make sense to a certain degree, right? Like, hey, either we can sell this player and get some money, or we can lose them for nothing, right? And I think Fnatic is the most front of mind example right now, right? Like, oh, Selfmade and Whippo don't plan to re-sign at the end of this year. We better at least sell the contract for something, and try something else. Bring in Adam as a new young player. Like, so let's salvage the scenario best we can. But that's not the only way to view the scenario. The other scenario is, do we need to have a contract to keep this player inside our org, or what are we doing to make them want to stay here, right? Because these contracts often get broken with a year left on them anyways, and if the player doesn't want to play there, they're not going to be an effective performer. Like, I think there's a lot more of that compared to these North American traditional sports where, hey, you belong to the team and you do your best, otherwise you're, sabotaging your own career if you don't try your best. But in esports, it's not like that, right? The players, I think, have a little more self-direction and power and so on. And I get pretty concerned when I see orgs treating these like contract end dates as a big looming, like, if you're afraid of the end date of the contracts of your players, Dignitas did this with Johnson too. If you're afraid of that, then you should be self-evaluating and saying, why are we afraid of them walking? If they're such an important player for us, why do we think that we can't retain them, and what do we need to do to make it so we can retain these players in the future? That's kind of the way I see it. And I think that there are some orgs that have not been, not that they can always solve those problems, and there's sometimes going to be players who want to walk no matter what you do. But I think that's the most important thing to worry about, is not how to game the contract system the best to give yourself the most resources, but how to make your team a place that players want to come to. Because that's my little ranty concern about Fnatic and what they're doing right now is, if these moves work out with Whippo going to jungle and Adam coming in and so on, great. If they don't work out, I'm really concerned that Fnatic have damaged their ability to retain and attract players long term with the way they've handled this. But I'm sure you probably don't necessarily want to comment on any of that. But
I was about to ask when you said your first sentence, is this throwing shade at Fnatic? What I will say is that I agree to an extent with what you're saying. The question is, what are you offering, right? And a player to want to be a part of your org. And that's not simply just about financial incentives, right? It's about, what are you doing to help this player develop? What are you doing to help give this player opportunities? It's also, I think it can also be, removing a player early because you're worried about how soon their contract is expiring, but also sometimes about retaining a player because you're worried that giving that player up to another team may make that other team stronger. Sure. Even though you don't want that player for LCS, you don't want to give that player to another team because they may go into LCS, promote, and beat you. And I think that you see a little bit of both in North America, but whilst I believe that there is talent in North America, there is not as much talent in North America as there is in LPL and LCK and all of these other regions. And if you have teams choosing to hoard talent in this way, when they don't intend to promote them into LCS, this is not something that North America as a region can sustain. If all 10 teams are holding on to players in their academy and amateur in their amateur programs, academy and amateur programs, then you're going to have a shortage of promising talent making its way up. And for me, if I have one of my players and they have an LCS offer, and I don't think that they're going to be there in EG, maybe not next year, but maybe the year after, if I don't see that LCS is an option for this player, I don't want this player to sit in my academy team because I think my main team player is better. I trust myself to make the assessment. And it's great if somebody from my academy team goes and plays in LCS. Because it means that the next time I try to sign somebody else for that position, then they'll be like, oh wow, EG didn't lock me. And they gave all of these other guys who came up the opportunity to play. And I think that's kind of the central part about how we see talent development in EG. Primarily it's for ourselves.
I think there are a couple different, you can be an org that has such a strong brand and so on, and had a good reputation for coaching and development, that you attract the players to come there in the first place. But I think if you don't then give them the opportunity to move on when they're ready and when the situation is right, you might swing your brand a little bit the other direction. And I think, I'm not affiliated with anyone else, so I can say that that's probably a bit of a Cloud9 problem that they're walking themselves into right now. They've done a great job of attracting all kinds of players into their org and being very successful as an academy team and so on. But if they don't let some of those players move on, I'm curious. I haven't actually specifically heard this from any players, but I'm curious whether there are players out there who are starting to look at that and reevaluating whether they would want to play in C9 Academy or not. But we'll see what happens with them, and whether or not that ends up shifting anything. Because there are a lot of good reasons that you would still want to be in the C9 organization. So it's not like it's black and white.
I mean, I think C9 are one of the organizations in North America that also invest a lot in their talent development. But sometimes going straight into, to use a soccer analogy, going straight into Real Madrid's youth academy isn't necessarily the best way to play for Real Madrid, right? Like, there's a lot of players who go into the youth academy on a big soccer team, and then because they're in that team, they don't get the individual attention they need, and it ends up damaging their career in the long term. Whereas sometimes you see players go to smaller academy systems, and then they build up, they find success, and then by showing how good they can be at like the European level or the national level, then they get the opportunities later. And this is a decision path that a lot of upcoming talent in North America needs to think about. It's not just about joining a big org immediately. And I consider EG also to be a big org. It's about finding the right fit that will help you develop and help with your career long term. And hopefully we can position EG into a place where we become like one of if not the number one destination for young talent to choose if they get the option.
Yeah, and I also want to be clear that I'm not trying to like just throw shade on C9 or anything like that, because their approach has worked out very well for them as an LCS team, especially. Like they had Blabber working in their academy system until he was in the right situation, and they were in the right situation to make him the full-time starter, and that has worked out very well for them. Fudge worked up from academy and their LCS team. Like, it has worked out very, very well for them. So I think that they would look at the way they've been running things and say it's been successful. But there's some pros and cons to it.
I know, Tim, you're a big fan of King. Is there anything to do with King, what you're saying?
Yeah, no, I mean, he's the example of, but see, like from the C9 perspective, from the player perspective, if you're King, you're probably sitting there going, I wish I could be in the LCS right now, but I'm locked into C9 Academy. But from the Cloud9 org perspective, you might be looking at it and saying, hey, there may be a day in the future where we're ready to move on from Sven, let go of that import slot, and have King come up, be a domestic player, and maybe a cheaper contract, and maybe that gives us more flexibility somewhere else. Like, as they still have him as an asset in their org that they can feel good about. So, it's, do you want what's better for the org? Do you want what's better for the player? They're not always the same thing.
For people who don't know Tim that well, who are listening to this podcast, Tim is a huge King fan. One of the biggest King advocates on the NA server, I would say, right?
Maybe. I'm one of them.
Fudge King.
Fudge and King, and I'd say my list of that is pretty long. So let's move on to some of the other things that you guys have been looking at and making moves on. You also brought in Team Luke for Academy, and this is a move that I think probably flew under the radar compared to some of the other things. But what is it about Team Luke that you saw that prompted you to pick him up for Academy?
So we as a coaching staff watched a lot of amateur and watched a lot of academy, and certain people on my coaching staff do a lot of one-to-one work with players even that aren't part of EG, and we have a pretty good overview of talent that's coming up in the amateur and academy scene. Basically, in spring this season, I sacrificed watching CB LOL. I love Brazil. I love Vietnam, and I sacrificed watching these regions so that I can make sure that I was watching every single collegiate match that I possibly could. Definitely every single amateur game that was played, that was streamed, I've watched, even the ones where I couldn't watch live.
And that's a lot.
And proving it. Yeah, that's a lot. And I had to sacrifice a lot of things that I really, really love watching. I mean, I really love Brazil. I had somebody ask me what I thought about Brazil's chances at MSI this year, and I couldn't give them a fair answer, and that made me really, really sad. But I think we as an org have a really good idea of some of the talent that's coming up, and I think we've spoken about this before. But in Europe, we always had a list, right, on Splice Badlands, right? There's always 5 people on the list, and either your prospect number one, your prospect number two, prospect three, four, five. But the way that it was done on Spice Bad Lads is you always had the guy who was number one, and you would do everything in your power to go inside that guy, and then you don't even talk to number two, three, four, five. You just go for number one, and then find there's sometimes where he'll choose to go somewhere else, in which case you go number two, two, three, four, five. And Luke, I think Team Luke was pretty much was up there. He's a player that's really, really impressed us. I didn't even realize that he would be available as a free agent, but I think, let me just quickly check. But I think they'd already made decisions over what they wanted to do with their new AD carry.
Well, because some of the background on it, right? Some of the background was that Team Luke played for CLG Academy for a few games to fill in because of, I think it was visa issues, and then he went back into playing amateur, right? So, but I don't think he was, there wasn't a contract anymore with CLG.
So I meant with Wildcard. Wildcard. Yeah. So I was really surprised that he was available from Wildcard because, I mean, he was really, really good in the amateur circuit, Team Luke. So originally, I didn't think he would be somebody that was available. So we were really surprised to see he was available. And when we knew he was available, he became. Obviously, we had internal tryouts and he had to prove his way. But even before the tryouts, when I saw that this was a player that we had that was potentially an option, I was firstly very surprised, and secondly, I'm very glad that he's chosen to come here. I think he's one of the really strong up and coming AD carries in the region. When Wildcard were good, it was often basically through him. I felt last split, and I think they brought in Arrow, so I can kind of understand.
Yeah,
because I think Arrow now has his green card. I was very happy to have him, I'm sure that he can show a lot. He can show a lot right now. I think in terms of personality, he is definitely somebody which meshes in a bit more with the amateur guys that we have. I will say that our amateur team is maybe. So in LCS, people will look at the performance on stage and maybe think, okay, this is a team that likes to have fun and likes to clown a lot. But actually, I think even players like Jizuke and especially Impact are very, very serious about the game. They're pretty serious and they like to have, some of the discussions we have in review are quite intense. Academy, I think, is kind of the polar opposite. I mean, there's a lot of people who are a little bit like clowns in the academy team. I'm not going to call out individual people, but we definitely have three clowns in the academy team, and he definitely fits in well. From what I've seen in scrim so far, our academy team looks really, really scary coming into the season. I think maybe we hit the ground a bit slow in spring because we had all the visa issues with Mystiques and with Shoryu. But this season they have a clear idea of how they want to play. They're already comfortable around each other, and Tony and Jojo already know how to play side lanes. So I think they've they've hit the ground running, and Team Luke has been a big part of that. I would say that his macro understanding of the game is, I mean, he's a bit more experienced than Danny, but he has some good understandings of how to play the game, and he's not out of his depth, which I think is particularly impressive. And obviously, you've seen his team fighting. Like anyone who's watched any amateur this season, Wildcard were at Proving Grounds. They were one of the top 5 amateur teams, and he was by far the star player. Him and Daption were both pretty good. Their bot lane was very impressive. Yeah,
for sure. And I always felt Wildcard was always one of the better prepared and coached looking teams, from as far as you can tell from the outside. In amateur, that they had plans, they knew who they were playing against and what how to work against the teams they were playing against. So I always give them a lot of credit for that as well. What have you seen in terms of the growth of some of the other players in your academy team? And I think the name that a lot of people end up looking at and wanting to hear more about, and that I tend to promote a lot, is Jojo Pian. How have you felt about the growth of him, but also Tony and the rest of them from spring You mentioned their ability to play side lanes, things like that. Are they working on kind of on a good trajectory that you're pretty happy with?
Yeah, I mean, I think they are. They're doing well. I mean, I would say that I've been very impressed with Tony's improvement in spring. I can't claim any credit for this. This is a lot down to Kelsey Moser and her one-to-one work with him. They've been doing, one-to-ones at least once a week, sometimes even twice, three times a week. Just making sure that he's comfortable playing side lanes in the right situation. Obviously, our academy team is a very aggressive team, but they're not a team that really wins through team fighting. They're a team that wins through out rotating and forcing skirmishes with numbers advantages. And I think if you want to play that style, it's very, very hard to play that style, even at LCS level, let alone at academy level. Um, and I've been very impressed with Tony's improvement in this area. And to be honest, when he joined EG, he basically had no clue about what a side lane was.
Yeah, I was
But
gonna say
now,
like when I watched him in back in the off season when scouting grounds and all the scouting grounds prep I did, and there were some different like kind of tryouts, public tryouts set up or semi-public tryouts, and I watched a lot of that. And my main takeaway from Tony Top was, hey, he's got hands. He knows how to like win trades really well and lane really hard, but he doesn't know when to follow a wave. He doesn't know when to back off a wave. He doesn't know when to group. And he just didn't have that. So that was my impression of him 6 months ago, right?
yep. And yeah, so I've been very impressed with his improvement. With Jojo, I would say the thing that I like most about Jojo is that he's never satisfied. So, to give an example from this, he got rank one recently. EG
Congratulations to
maybe
him.
internally put pressure on him, maybe to tweet that he made rank one. But I went to say congratulations on making rank one, and he just said, you know, it, it wasn't something really that deserved congratulations. Sure, he was happy to make rank one, but his goal isn't to be just somebody who's very strong in academy, somebody who's very strong in North America. He's really serious about pushing himself as far as he can be. And when we scrimmed against, or when he's played against LCS mid laners and done well, it's never enough. It's not, oh wow, this guy's in LCS and I outlaned him and kind of smashed him in lane. It's a case of, okay, uh, so this is where I am now, but I've still got so much more to go. And I think that you have to be really careful with a player like this, not to overhype, not to overhype them. I think Jojo is somebody who obviously has bags of talent. He obviously has really good hands. He obviously understands how to play the game. He has a large role in our shot calling. But this is somebody who spends a lot of time studying other people, and his goal is to be somebody who can be, who wants to push himself as far as he can, and he's not after plaudits. He's after improvement, and this is something I admire about him a lot. I think it gives him a huge amount of potential because his driving force is not recognition. His driving force is perfection of his craft. But I also asked that obviously he's developing at a good pace right now, but give him some space. I'm sure that lots of people recognize what he wants to do and how he's developing, but he needs some time still. He looks good in academy and amateur, but that's because he does have weaknesses in his game, and those are things that players are just not able to punish at this level. So, and those are things that he has to continue to work on improving. It's not enough to just win your lane; you have to win the game yourself, right? With your 2-0 advantage, and that's something he's got to continue to work on. So, I've been happy with the development of both. They both have a long way to go, but from what I've seen coming into so far in scrims, coming into summer, they didn't forget anything in the break, which is a huge relief.
Yeah.
Because often at academy level they forget half of the stuff, and you have to go and teach them again from scratch.
Yeah,
So.
you go back to school in September and you can't remember what you learned in back in the last semester. Yeah, that kind of thing. And of course, you guys have so much experience in your Academy jungle position. So, that I'm sure that's helpful for the solo lanes and how to play as well. To wrap off some of this stuff, how much, just because it's been an interesting topic lately, and the idea of playing in houses in the tournament realm and stuff like that. I know I have seen some of your players participate in the ones that Core JJ was putting on and streaming and so on. I think JoJo was in some of those. I can't remember specifically whether others were. How valuable do you think that kind of thing is for player development? And have you encouraged your players to try to get involved in those?
Um, so, to be honest, I don't really know much about what the drama was about in-houses. I saw Bjergsen do a tweet responding to another one that was deleted, but that's all I really know. So I don't know what it's about.
Drama aside, drama is drama, but just the concept in general of being able to play on Tournament Realm with comms and stuff with other pro or aspiring pro players, do you find that valuable?
So I think it is valuable, but what I would say is that I think that the most valuable thing is, I think Core JJ, the amount of work. I'm not too sure how much I'm supposed to talk up people in other orgs, but the amount of work that Core JJ has done to promote young talent in North America is unsurpassed. Maybe Kelsey was, but doing his in-houses, inviting people, being sure to recognize upcoming talent, give them a spotlight. Even he was co-streaming some of the amateur and
Proving Grounds
Proving Grounds thing, bringing his fan base and showing them, look, here is some NA talent. Recognize these guys is very impressive and appreciated from and should be appreciated and should be acknowledged and should be appreciated. And for me, the in-houses that he does are the big thing. Being invited to play in a Core JJ in-house, if one of my players said that they had that opportunity, that's something, A, you should be congratulated for being invited, and B, you should always do it. In terms of the playing on Tournament Realm and things like this, the question is, what is the point of your practice? And different people play solo queue for different reasons. Some people play to climb as high as they can. Some people play to limit test. Caps can climb to number 1 in solo queue when he wants, but normally stays around 800 LP, 800 to 1000 LP, because he's testing his limits a lot and often running it down in EU solo queue. But if somebody like that is playing in an in-house and the other guys are playing to try to improve and learn on their macro side, then you're going to have a problem, right? And I don't think that it's that there are not 10 people at once that want to play solo queue. It's just that to play the Tournament Realm in-houses, it's that those players, firstly, you have to justify the annoyance of playing in that kind of environment, right? Because you have to be it's less restful, right? But also your goals for your practice may be very different to goals from another person on that team. And also sometimes somebody who's playing in one of those in-houses, their goal may be to learn as much macro as possible. And you may have that understanding that they don't have. And maybe you don't want to give that information up. But I think the main issue with the in-houses has been that firstly, there's not enough players of a high enough level. But I think that's improving. Especially from last spring, and it will continue to improve as amateur and academy get more exposure. But I think that the main problem has been people wanting to use solo queue and in-houses for different reasons, and those goals being incompatible.
So. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely. Just listening to the comms and some of those, sometimes people are trying out picks they haven't played before, trying to learn Rumble Jungle or things like that. They're doing some games from Contracts and Armeo and so on. And okay, they haven't really played much Rumble before. You can tell they're just trying to figure it out, right? And so you can't fault them for that. But if somebody else is, not there to experiment and learn, it's going to be a little bit of a struggle for sure. And I think, Core JJ running those has definitely been valuable for promoting and giving opportunity to some other players, but he's also clearly given preference to people in the TL organization, which is not a criticism of him, just saying
Sure.
him getting Armeo and Jenkins and so on in there. I think that gives you a reason to look at and say Core isn't the only one who can do this. we can do similar kinds of things with our players, and it just takes a lot of investment and effort to set it up. But there's a lot of benefit there if you can make it work for sure.
Of course, of course.
So let's wrap things up with some questions from listeners here. And it's generally possible to submit questions in advance. I post those on Patreon at patreon.com/oracleselixir if you want to post questions there when I kind of announce the week's guest, or live in the Twitch chat while we're doing it. So we have a question from Masternamer123 who wants to know what you think about the necessity of coaches learning different coaching styles, because different styles of coaching are going to work for different personalities. Do you think that's something where there are set styles and opportunities to learn them, or coaches, is coaching even that developed in League?
Wait, is coaching that developed in League?
That's my add-on. The real question is, what do you think about the necessity of learning new coaching styles?
I think coaching learning coaching should be treated in exactly the same way as learning how to play, right? Learn your specific primary style, work out what you're good at, specialize until you reach the point where you have some amount of competency, like high level competency in a particular area, and then diversify. But just like I don't think you can be a top player without knowing how to play weak side. Although players like Marin have sometimes proven me wrong on that front. But
that's not really fair though, because when you're Marin and you've got the teammates you have, they're going to make you succeed.
Sure. But I mean, the exception proves the rule. In the same way that I think that applies to coaching, right? When you're trying to learn as a coach, find what you're strong at, work out what you're strong at, specialize in that area, but recognize, and that will allow you to contribute, right? Like if you're joining a new organization and you don't have specialization, right? Because you've tried to spread yourself too thin, you can't contribute immediately, right? When you join, even like an amateur team and especially Academy or LCS, you are not going to have a skill set to be able to contribute everywhere at once, right? Especially if you're a new coach coming in. This is just how it is. It's a natural progression of you stepping up to a higher level, right? Doesn't mean you can't learn, but if you want to contribute immediately, you must have specialization, right? Once you then have your specialization and you've worked really hard in that area, and maybe you want to be a mediator type coach, right? And you look at you've read a lot in conflict resolution or leadership or that kind of thing. Then diversify into another area, but don't try to do it all at once. But I do think that all coaches should be able to coach in 3 or 4 different styles. But even for me, like I have a primary style that I like to coach, and I have 2 or 3 different additional styles that I use in one-to-ones. But there are a certain type of player that I am pretty bad at coaching. I tend to coach the players that I tend to do best at coaching are the ones that I'm, how do you say, maybe a little bit toxic. I tend to do really well coaching those guys. But that's my responsibility as a head coach, is make sure that I have people in my coaching staff who can help out with the players that I'm not best equipped to work with. But I do think so. In answer to the question, yes, you do have to, but don't start in that area, right?
Yeah,
diversify later.
And maybe just as a really brief follow-up on that, some of the different styles of coaching that you might fall into. So you mentioned like being a mediator, so being good at helping the team members communicate with one another and come to consensus together. There could be more of, I guess, an authoritative coaching style where you are saying, hey, follow me, this is how we're going to play, this is what I'm asking you to do, and you get on board. Might be more of an authoritative style. Are there any other like quick ones you can name drop out there without getting in the details too much?
I mean, you can have a I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's spelled laissez-faire, but I think it's laissez-faire.
Laissez-faire, yeah. French person in to fix it. Or just relaxed, right? Like relaxed and easygoing. Keep the tone light.
There's mediator style. There's so many different styles that you can go into.
Define your
own. What I will say though is that as a coach, one of the things that people tend to overrate is how much in-game knowledge you need to have. You need to have somebody in your staff or multiple people on your staff that have good in-game knowledge. And as a coach, you should always strive to improve your in-game knowledge as much as you possibly can. But it's not a necessity at the start. The problem is that if you have big weaknesses in your coaching skill set, the people that you could work with or the coaching staffs that you can fit into are are different, right? You're limited. It's just like if you have a mid jungle and your mid laner doesn't communicate a lot, he can only play with a jungler that communicates a lot. So maybe somebody like Broxah is a good example, right? Like has played historically really, really well with mid laners who communicate a lot and provide him structure and tends to play really defensively when he doesn't have those players. In the same way as if you're a coach, try to diversify your skill set because that will allow you to fit into more areas and always have a baseline of in-game knowledge, right? Like when
Yeah.
I say when I say you don't need in-game knowledge, like you can't be like a gold level knowledge, right? Like you need to have good knowledge, right? But you don't have to have the best in the entire world, provided you can understand what other teams are doing and be able to break it down to your players in a way that they can understand.
So what I'm hearing is if you can't reach Diamond 1, you shouldn't be an LCS coach, or
Of course, of
so
course. Like I
just a
would,
little troll for you there for the group of the audience that'll appreciate that.
I mean, I think that all players, all coaches that can't make at least silver should be fired instantly.
Uh, J663 Beast mentioned that you used to watch VCS and is just wondering if you've watched any of the unofficial English casts, or do you still follow VCS at all, or is that one of the ones you had to drop?
Okay, so to be clear, last spring split, I didn't watch many emerging regions. I have to learn North America. I need to know who everyone is in North America. I've been trying really hard to do that. Most of my spare time is spent watching NA Amateur, which maybe has meant that I missed out on a few things. I missed out on Senna Heimerdinger in LCK because I was spending so much time watching NA Amateur, which made me really sad because we could definitely have played that in playoffs against TSM. But anyway, the I did watch VCS a lot last year. VCS always have a very unique. VCS is what people that don't watch LPL think LPL is. I think that's
Yeah.
how I would describe VCS. The games are always really fun. They're always very, very chaotic. It's often pretty hard to predict who will win. The other thing that I've noticed, so I've watched a lot of Vietnam back when I was in Brazil, especially so 2016, 2017. I would say that because you always had a team from Vietnam who would go to the international wildcard events and who you had to know in depth, right? So a lot of the older pros in Vietnam are players that I know well. People like Celebrity, people like G4. Just trying to like I can just name a list of Vietnamese pros, but like those kind of guys, I know a lot about their playstyle because I've watched tens of their games, if not hundred of their games, like just preparing for those kind of tournaments. A lot of the new guys who are coming up, I don't know that well. The thing that I will say about Vietnam is is that players tend to come up and then flame out really, really quickly. Good example of this is a player who I don't know how maybe some of your international viewers will know, called Zeros, who was all the hype, but flamed out kind of in 2 years. And I think that suggests to me, and he's not the only one, and it suggests to me that they have some infrastructure issues in Vietnam that leads to this happening repeatedly over and over again. And I don't know what the issue is, but if a player like Evie can stay at the top and continue to improve even to the age of 25, with all those expectations on him, I don't see why you don't have those kind of long-term sustained careers in Vietnam. So it's a shame because there's a lot of talent in Vietnam, and you know, if if LCS wants to expand into another emerging region and have those guys count as NA resident, Vietnam is the emerging region you should kind of look at. That's all I was saying.
For sure. We'll just do a couple more here. Edgyhoon wants to know whether you guys have plans to have roster movement between Academy and LCS. Is that like a philosophy that you guys approach the split with?
So generally, I'm not a massive fan of 10-man rosters because I think that a lot of League is about you don't have to be the best players, the best player at your position. You need to be the best player for your team at that position. So I know that Alfari, Alfari gave an interview, like a reflections interview with Thorin, where he said that a lot of he was really really frustrated with how people in Europe were comparing him with Arome in summer 2020 or things like this, when he felt that he was just miles better. Um, but it's worth saying that Alfari hasn't been to Worlds for a few years, even though he's clearly the best top laner, like individually in Europe and now in North America. Although we have Impact, like between him and Impact, top two. But what I would say is that, sometimes you can be the best player for a team, and becoming the best player for a team is something that you need to learn by scrimming a lot together. And if you keep making changes all the time, you're not going to be able to develop any long-term synergy. Will EG make changes? Well, I mean, we've already brought in Danny, but I don't think you'll be seeing too much changes between the roster. Maybe there's a world where we sub in the entire Academy roster. Like it's a 27 game 9 week season.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to rule out, maybe we sub in the Academy guys for 1 week. If the players need a rest, or our macro is so bad that we need to have a mid-season boot camp. We need a week where we have to work on something. I won't rule that out, but I think you won't be seeing EG making changes every single week.
Yeah, fair enough. And to give credit to edgyhoon and take some credit away from myself, actually the question was directed a little more in that direction of bringing the entire 5-man up for the rest purposes, rest or not.
Oh, okay.
So
okay.
I'll take the L on that one. But sounds like yes.
There's a world where that happens. I'm not going to guarantee anything, but there is a world where that happens.
Fair enough. Okay, and we'll finish off with this one from LaHoyaDon. Do you think LCS, to paraphrase a little bit, do you think the LCS is on the right path to increase its chances of competing internationally compared to now, and why or why not?
I don't think, as I said earlier at the start of this podcast, I don't think LCS are that far away. I think that I think Cloud9's issues were not that they were a significantly worse team than the other major region teams at this tournament. Because they got wins against RNG, they got wins against Damwon, they got wins against Mad. I think their main issue this tournament was that they didn't find a style of play that they were comfortable with, and they also didn't deal well with individual mistakes. Like you could see whenever Blabber made if Elyoya had a game where he flashed over the wall in the finals. I think it was in the finals of in the Rogue game 3 when Mad lands a 2-0 down against Rogue, and you can hear the voice comms. And he's on red side, he's in enemy Raptors, and he just flashes over the wall trying to stun the mid laner and just misses him. Like he's on Udyr and just runs at him, and the guy just walks away and just like pings him. And you hear the comms, and Humanoid saying, "What are you doing?" Like what, in like a joking way, and Elyoya is saying like, "I don't know what I'm doing," and just laughs in like a funny way, and then you hear Kazi and Kaiser laughing in bot lane, right? I don't feel that that's something that was happening on Cloud9 at this tournament. Just looking at their player cams, so each individual, a mistake isn't just going to lose you the game, right? Unless it causes you to change your play style or lose confidence in yourself, in which case, sure, every single mistake is a potential game ender. So I think Cloud9. I don't think it's NA is too far behind that we can't make top 4 at MSI. I think it's just Cloud9 had some issues and they didn't fix them in time. Is NA on the right path long term? Yes, the Proving Grounds, the changes to the Proving Ground circuit are huge. They're a really, really big deal. You will see the benefits of this in 2022, 2023, probably 2023. The next few years might be a bit painful, but the changes have been put in place to make sure that NA talent has a place where it can develop. And if people overreact too much to results in the short term, there are risks that things can be done that will cause long-term damage when the changes that have needed to be made have already been made, right? And people talk about viewership of Academy, viewership of Amateur. Sure, the viewership isn't that high right now, but you wait till some of those guys start playing in LCS and start dominating LCS, and you will see massive increase in viewership. Like as soon as because I think there's a lot of doubt right now that from players thinking, okay, if I climb really high in solo queue, or if I do really well in amateur, or if I do really well in academy, will I be noticed? Will I get this opportunity? And if I won't, what's the point of making an effort? And I think that there has been one generation of players that has been very, very let down by the North American system. They're players like a player like Yumbi, who's now 24, 25, should have had his shot a long, long time ago. And the fact that Yumbi is only now playing his first academy split is a problem with the system. It's a flaw in the system. He's been good enough for a very, very long time, but hasn't had the opportunity. Some of those changes are happening now, and if you don't get your opportunity, you can go to Wildcard, you can go to AOE, you can go to a new when they are unbanned, and you can go and show yourself, and you can go and say, "Notice me, pay attention, I'm here," right? And this is something that this outlet has been something that North America has lacked for a long time. The only way that you could promote yourself is through streaming. And then once you settle into the streaming lifestyle, sometimes, maybe you don't want to go competitive anymore. But I feel that we've let down a whole generation of North American talent, and the fixes are already in place, and we're already seeing the benefits of them coming into play right now. So give it some time.
I would say that structurally, the league is doing the right things with the Proving Ground circuit and broadcasting it and all of the opportunity for it and making it visible. That is correct. What the next phase that needs to happen is the LCS orgs taking advantage of that and actually moving these players up. I'm a little bothered by the fact that Firefire has been put in a situation where he feels that the best opportunity for him is to not play amateur in summer, because he's won it three splits in a row and not gotten his academy opportunity. I'm bothered by that. Like, there are LCS orgs where it doesn't make sense to bring Firefire up, and there are LCS orgs where it did make sense to bring him up, and it would have made you more competitive, given you a player who had a chance to improve even further over summer and become an LCS potential level. That's not a guarantee he's going to become good enough to play an LCS, but he had a better chance of developing into an LCS player than some of the mids in academy for summer.
Of course.
And so
I just
yeah.
I mean, I say on the Firefire thing, Firefire was the sub for EG, right? Like, I mean, we had Gyu last year, and Gyu was somebody who was signed before, and there were visa issues or something, and Firefire was the guy that was brought in. And obviously, I think we've spoken in the past about how Firefire was the guy that I was looking at for Mad Lions, not
Mad Lions
Academy.
Academy.
Academy. And the fact that he can't even get an academy spot in NA is, I mean, it's crazy. And I mean, he's been a bit vocal about this on Twitter, but this is exactly the kind of guy that deserved his chance and didn't get his chance, right? And
he was let down over the past 2.5 years, not just right now, right?
Yeah, and I don't know if it's too late for him. I don't think. I mean, he's still young, right?
No.
But when you lose faith that the system is there to promote you or give you an opportunity, it can affect your mindset, and maybe you think, okay, this is something. Why am I doing this? Right? Shouldn't I just go and do something else? Maybe content creation. Maybe I just go and leave esports and do something else. And who knows? Like, I mean, you've mentioned Jojo Pion, right? So I'll just mention that. How many Jojo Pions have North America lost because they didn't think that solo queue mattered, or they didn't take the risk in developing them, or when they did develop them, if they didn't develop immediately, how many were thrown aside after one split? Right, or 1 year, right? And this is a question that we have to face as North America as a region. But all I say is that the solutions are there.
Yep.
But
now it's on the orgs to do their part.
Now it's on the orgs to do their part. But this is not, again, there's no fast immediate solution, right?
No.
Like it's going to take it's going to take time. It took EU Masters. This generation of Mad Lions and Rogue came up in EU Masters, is now 2021. They came up in 2019, right? So it's going to take time. It's not, you can't expect it to be immediate. It's going to be like 2022, 2023 that we see this new generation. And let's see if it happens.
Yeah, I think mid-season is always harder to make these moves too, and for what it's worth, I think seeing what the LCS orgs do for their spring 2022 rosters and that offseason is going to be a lot more telling about whether the orgs have actually paid attention to this and bring those guys up. But I do think that I think there was a lot more opportunity in spring 2021 for orgs to bring in that talent, and some of them did it, and some of them brought in, nothing against Oceanic players, but I think some of them brought in OPL veterans instead of NA young players that maybe could have been brought up. That's no criticism on the players, but
But in fairness, then like some of those players are not in the league anymore, right?
yeah,
And I think people brought in a lot of OCE veterans without thinking what they wanted out of those guys.
yep,
They brought them in because they were the top players in OCE, and that's not why you should be bringing in somebody, right?
yeah.
Like,
That's not the purpose of Academy to
yeah,
me.
like
I mean, maybe it was for those orgs. I don't know.
but I mean, it's interesting that the one of the guys. So obviously, if you'd asked me who were the top OCE prospects, I would have said Isles is number one, Isla's number two, and Pabu's number three, and nobody picked up Pabu. And now Pabu got to show at MSI that maybe some people should have been paying attention, but it was just like, oh, this guy, how serious is this guy? He's a role swap player, and instead of thinking, wow, he's this good after 1 year as a jungler, people were saying, oh, he wasn't good enough to cut it in top lane, so he's gone to jungle, right? Which is,
Yeah, and
I'm
to some extent, the orgs looked at who from Oceania went to Worlds and look at those guys
yeah,
first, and that's also like you can understand that, but I don't think it shows necessarily the same level of due diligence that might have been necessary.
yeah.
But
No, I agree with that. Can I just answer one question that I saw in your
yeah,
chat?
for sure.
Just as a follow-up to this, somebody said, "What is stopping orgs from making these changes?" And if you ask me, nothing is stopping them. And I think that you've seen, you know, sure, 100 Thieves and EG and Cloud9, who are the three orgs you would see for picking up talent from amateur, had their amateur teams in place at the start of this year. But you're seeing, I mean, TSM are doing it now. TL? TSM and Dignitas have
No,
definitely done it. Do TL have
TL
amateur?
don't have an amateur team, no.
Okay, TL don't have amateur. Okay, but you see Dignitas and TSM expanding there. You're seeing a lot of other orgs do it. And sure, just because you're late to the playing field, you're late to playing doesn't mean that you can't make good innovations in the space. And I think it should be applauded sometimes if you recognize you have an issue and you try to go and fix it. But again, there has to be an understanding that this talent does exist, right? And if you're doing it just for clicks and views and things like this, then it will become very, very obvious in the long term because you won't be promoting any of your players, and you'll just be cycling around people who have big names in amateur.
And I think it's entirely fair for LCS orgs to say, we don't feel we have the coaching staff in place right now. We think we have bigger problems to solve at the academy level, whatever it is, and not do an amateur team. I think that's fine. I think one of the orgs that I think is doing an approach kind of like that is FlyQuest, where LaHoyaDon, who does a lot of their academy scouting and so on work, he watches a ton of amateur, and he's doing content around it, and you can tell they may not have an amateur team, but they're paying very close attention to amateur, and I think that's fine too. That approach can work.
Yep. I think the amateur as well is something that should be used for developing coaches and testing coaches as well.
Yep.
I will say that I'm not going to give too much away because I don't want to give too many orgs advice. But definitely there are ways that you can find space in amateur to develop coaching staff which you think have potential. And I'll leave it there.
Definitely. Well, we have run nice and long, and it's been great, and that's good. But I think we should wrap this up, and I really appreciate you joining me on the show and sharing all your thoughts, Peter. Is there anything particular you'd like to shout out? Your social media, any EG programs, things like that?
No, just a shout out EG, shout out the EG fans. We really, really appreciate everything you did for us last split, even when there were some of the rougher times during the year. Just want to say thank you. Also, acknowledging a lot of the work that people like you, Tim, and Cubby, who's in the chat, and others have done in promoting amateur and academy and collegiate this year. I mean, a lot of those guys who are stars in that league right now will be the great new hope for LCS in 2 years, and giving them that additional exposure helps them get to that level. So just appreciate the work that you guys are doing. Yeah, thank you for having me on. Am I your second repeat guest?
I'm not sure. I'd have to look back and count. Probably third or fourth. But,
Okay.
but you are a repeat guest, which not everybody gets to be. So good to have you on again.
Thank you very much for having me, Tim.
And thank you to everyone for listening. You can support the True Sight podcast at patreon.com/OraclesElixir. You can subscribe to the show on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and as well as anchor.fm/TrueSight. And make sure you check out the Oracles Elixir Discord server to talk about League of Legends esports, data science, and other topics, including, yesterday a rather long rant I put out on the subject of literary criticism of The Last Jedi. And so you can get links for all those in the show notes and make sure you check those out. This has been the True Sight podcast, and I'm Tim Sevenhuisen. Thanks for listening.